Hello, my name is Anne-Marie Cannon, and I'm the host of Armchair Historians. What's your favorite history? Each episode begins with this one question. Our guests come from all walks of life. YouTube celebrities, comedians, historians, even neighbors from the small mountain community that I live in. They're people who love history and get really excited about a particular time, place, or person from our distant or not so distant past. The jumping off point is the place where they became curious, then entered the rabbit hole into discovery. Fueled by an unrelenting need to know more, we look at history through the filter of other people's eyes. Armchair Historians is a Belgian Rabbit production. Stay up to date with us through Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Wherever you listen to your podcast, that is where you'll find us. Armchair Historians is an independent, commercial-free podcast. If you'd like to support the show and keep it ad-free, you can buy us a cup of coffee through Ko-fi, or you can become a patron through Patreon. Links to both in the episode notes. Hello, fellow armchair historians. I'd like to start the show by thanking our Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, including David C., Paul T., Beverly N., Tremors 8, Andrew B., Allison, Lauren, and Ruth. Thank you so much. Your support means the world to us. And if you can't support us through Ko-fi or Patreon, there are other things that you can do to really help the show. One of them is to follow us on social media and join the conversation. Also, you can leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. And finally, share the podcast with family and friends. In this episode, the third in our Mudlark series, I talked to Jason Sandy, member of the Society of Thames Mudlarks, trustee of the Thames Museum Trust and co-author of the book Thames Mudlarking, Searching for London's Lost Treasures. Jason shares his River Thames journey and talks about the river's history and the fellowship he has found within the Mudlark community. Originally from the United States, Jason is an architect and developer who moved to London in 2007. He discovered mudlarking in 2012 and has contributed to many articles and books on mudlarking, as well as lecturing, appearing on national television, and having an active presence on social media. Jason Sandy, welcome to Armchair Historians.
Thank you.
So excited because I am obsessed with mudlarking and the history behind it. So let's just get right off into the races and talk about what is your favorite history?
So you can tell from my accent that I'm not originally from Britain. I was born in the United States, born and raised in North Carolina. And I kind of grew up hearing about the Elizabethan explorers, Sir Walter Raleigh. Raleigh, North Carolina is obviously named after him. So I always grew up hearing about this interesting British side of history. So when I moved to London 15 years ago, I just became completely absorbed in the history. And unlike America, there's just history all around you, thousands and thousands of years of history. Growing up in America, one of the things that I first started collecting was actually Native American Indian arrowheads. And I absolutely love finding those in plowed fields. So when they would plow the field, we'd go out there the next day just looking for anything that was kind of pulled up by the plows. And I was always really excited to find that. So to find something in the Thames, which is thousands and thousands and thousands of years old, is absolutely mind-boggling. So just that tangible history, that's what I love about mudlarking, and that's my angle on history.
So you started from a young age treasure hunting.
Yes, yeah, I grew up in the countryside, and so there wasn't much else to do. So I spent a lot of time outdoors, and my parents didn't have a TV while I was growing up. So I spent a lot of times in the fields and out in the forest and in the lakes surrounding my house.
So when you moved to London, did you know about mudlarking, or was this something that you just learned about and then started doing?
So actually, I live along the river, so I'm only 2 minutes away. And when my kids were much younger, we used to go down there at low tide just because there are a lot of crabs, little eels that kind of swim around, minnows, shrimp. all of this wildlife, ducks. We have a lot of herons that fly along the river as well. So we were just captivated by the natural element of the river. And I had no idea that you could actually find historical artifacts. So my first kind of encounter with mudlarking was I was watching the National Geographic channel, and there was a guy from Chicago that came to London and met some mudlarks and went treasure hunting along the River Thames. And after 1 hour, I was absolutely mind blown at what they were finding along the river at low tide. So that was my first kind of introduction to mudlarking. And literally the next weekend, I was down on the Thames searching for myself. So when I found that first pipe bowl, I was just really beside myself, knowing that that was 300 years old.
Yeah.
That's the oldest thing I'd ever found before.
That was how long ago?
So I started mudlarking 10 years ago, April
Okay.
2012.
All right. So then you were hooked.
Yeah, they actually call my wife a Thames widow because I'm never at home. I'm always down along the river night and day, even though it's just a hobby. I have a full-time job, but it's an all-consuming hobby. Once the bug is bitten, you're hooked instantly, as I think you found out yourself.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. I love it. Like I said, I was in London for 10 days and I spent 5 of them mudlarking. So next time I just want to go mudlarking because I don't want to go to all those other places and be distracted from it's a bug. It's infectious. And I mean, if you're into it, there's certain people that I think take to it, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Then from there, one of the things I've noticed about the mudlark community in London is that people are really friendly. And it's not like they're competing with each other. It seems like they like to help each other. Some, and different people focus on different artifacts that they're really interested in. So, what is your favorite kind of period and artifact to find?
So, as a high school student in Virginia, my parents forced me to take Latin, which I was like, this is a dead language. I'm not interested in taking Latin. Dad, why do I need to take Latin? But he had gotten his PhD in classical studies and was all about ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So he wanted to instill that into his two sons. So both my brother and I were forced to take Latin kind of against our will. But that kind of just got me interested about Roman history. And my brother and I did eventually go to Rome on holiday, on vacation. And it was absolutely fabulous. Just, it's a living museum. You just walk through the streets and everything is just so old and ancient. So coming to London, I was always interested in how London began, and it was actually founded by the Romans in AD 43. So 10 years after Christ died is when London was started by the Romans. So that tangible connection with that time period, ancient Rome. So to find something that's from that time period and to hold it in your hand, knowing that the last person to touch that lived 2,000 years ago, that is just mind blowing.
So you love
So that,
the Roman history.
yeah, absolutely. That's I go to a specific patch of the foreshore which always has Roman artifacts, and I tend to find something Roman there every time. So,
Wow. So what's your favorite find?
well, as you can guess, it's a Roman find. It's actually a hairpin. So women a lot of times, even in Japan, wear their hair up in buns and put a long pin through it to secure the bun in place. And back in the Flavian period, around 60 AD, it was very fashionable to wear your hair in high false curls, and then you would have a large braided, almost like bun, at the back, and you would secure that with multiple pins. And the pin that I found has a beautiful figurine carved into it. It's made of bone, and
Oh,
it shows a woman. And maybe we can put this on your website so
I
that
would love
listeners
that.
can
Yeah.
actually see that. Yeah. But that's one of my favorite artifacts. And it was actually, I donated it to the Museum of London, and it's now on permanent display within the museum. So now
Wow.
hundreds, thousands of people can go see it, and it's on display in the general public. So that's the absolute thrill of mudlarking, is to find something, rescue that history that would have been washed out to sea eventually, and then have it put on permanent display for everyone to see, enjoy, and to learn from and research.
How long ago did you find that?
So, as it happens, my dad seems to be my lucky charm. And he was visiting London, and this was before everyone needed a permit to search even by eye. So he and I were just walking along the foreshore at low tide, and it was actually a really bad low tide. I think this was back in 2014. And we literally just stumbled upon it and peered down. It was staring straight up at me from the riverbed, and it was just a holy grail moment.
Wow. Just it wasn't even like in the mud.
No, it was just washed out, literally staring at me.
That's amazing. You're a member of the Society of Thames Mudlarks. And so when did that happen? When were you did they approach you or did you approach them?
So, in order to get into the society, you have to put your name on a waiting list.
Hmm.
So, it's limited to 50 people. That's regulated by the Port of London Authority. So, it's pretty much somebody either has to give up their place or somebody has to unfortunately die in order for
Hmm.
new members to get in.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so actually, over the last 2 to 3 years, because of COVID, no one's been able to join the society because of the cap. Fortunately, in September this year, we're allowing 8 new members into the society, which is very good. Um, and so, unfortunately, I was let in after 6 years on the waiting list. I was let in back in 2018.
And from what Simon said, you have to have a history of turning things in and that are of historically relevant and important. So, is that something that you had started doing from the very beginning, or did you do that once you got on the list?
So you start from the very beginning. As a normal permit holder, when you get the permit, it says that anything that's 300 years or older, you have to record with the Museum of London. So I have an appointment with the museum, or used to have an appointment with the museum once every 3 months, just to kind of take in my older finds, show them, and have them recorded. Now I've worked very closely with the Museum of London. They've actually taught me how to record the artifacts myself. So I can upload those to the British Museum's website, which is called the Portable Antiquities Scheme. And then it's verified by the Finds Liaison Officer that works at the Museum of London. So fortunately, I can do all of that recording myself. I'm a self-recorder, which is
Oh,
fantastic. Yeah.
yeah. How often do you go down to the foreshore?
I would say on average is about once a week. So as you know from your own experience, it's always kind of tide dependent. The low tides are typically, the really good low tides are every 2 weeks. So you kind of, I map out my whole year and kind of put all the key dates in my calendar so I know exactly what I need to plan around to make sure I don't end up meeting friends instead of going down onto the foreshore when it's super low. So I tend to go about twice on the super low tides, and then I wait every 2 weeks and then go twice again. But on average, it's about once a week.
Mm, I always was curious about that. If you lived there, like how often do you go down there?
Yeah, it kind of depends on your work schedule and how close you live to the river. Fortunately, I'm very close. So some days I can do 2 tides, so both the morning and the evening tides. And then the more productive areas are more towards central London. So then I have to travel into central London. But yeah, it kind of depends on how much spare time you have. And with 2 small children, I just didn't have a
Yeah,
lot of spare time. But yeah, I go when I can.
yeah. You've been doing this for a while and you co authored a book. Why don't you tell us about the book?
Yeah, so we, as you mentioned earlier, we have a great community of Mudlarks here in London, and we end up spending a lot of time together because we share that common interest of history. A lot of times, I don't even know what other people do. We just chat about what we found that day and what this other person had found and have a proper catch up. So normally we go mudlarking for about 4 hours and then go to the cafe or to get lunch afterwards or go for breakfast if it's super early morning tide. So within the book, what I wanted to do is capture the best artifacts that have been found by the whole community of mudlarks. So there's over 50 mudlarks represented within the books. And I kind of show their absolute best finds. And we've organized those so they're kind of chronological and tell the whole story of London just from the artifacts that have been found in the river. So some of the oldest things that we find are fossils, which are up to 200 million years old, and then flint tools, which are from Mesolithic, Bronze Age, Iron Age. They kind of made those throughout a long period of time. But those two of these are the oldest artifacts that we find in the Thames. Then we go into the Roman period, medieval period, Vikings. London had several Viking attacks during about the 9th century, 10th century. And then we move on to the Tudor times, on to the Stuart kings and queens and what people wore and lost during that time period, Georgian, Victorian, and then up into the modern day period. But what we're trying to do is tell the stories not about the kings and queens, but about everyday people so that we can relate to them. And a lot of the stuff that we find down there is not like precious silver or gold objects. It's more the everyday items, the utilitarian items. And that just really resonates with us now because we can relate to that and see how styles have changed over the years and see how people adorn themselves with jewelry, with cufflinks, with shoe buckles. So all of these small things just open a window to the past and really kind of reveal the history through these found objects.
One of the things in your book, and this is a stupid question, but I was going through it today, and there's some green cufflinks that you found, paste cufflinks. Were they together?
Yes. Yeah.
Because it looked, you took a picture. Is that exactly how you found them?
Yes. Yeah. So back then, cufflinks were double-sided. So you had a link on both sides, whereas today, normally you just have one side that's decorated and the other is just like that pivot rod that kind of secures it to the back of the link. Uh-huh. So they were actually connected together with a small loop fastener. So a lot of times the reason why they fell off and were lost in the Thames is because one side pops off and the other side falls into the river. So you normally don't find them together. But this is one of the rare ones that I found that was actually still linked together.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
How old were they?
So those are about the Georgian period. So 18th century.
Wow. Pretty color of green too.
Yeah, it is. So a lot of times they were actually using colored glass to imitate more precious gemstones. So it would have been worn by everyday people. So not kings or queens, but people like you and I. And what they would do is they would actually put a silver foil behind the glass and they would kind of chamfer the glass, cut the glass to really make it look like a precious gemstone. And then that was then enclosed or encased, set within either a brass setting or a pewter setting. And the brass was highly polished, so it did look like gold. And when you'd have a very striking green stone in there, it looked like an emerald. So you could do a pretty good fake job by cutting glass and then setting it in a very bright colored brass setting.
Wow. So what's the name of the book?
It's called Thames Mudlarking, Searching for London's Lost Treasures, and it's available at all good bookshops, both online and in stores. And it costs less than $10, I think, in the States, depending on where you shop for it.
It's a lovely book. It's a great book. I'm holding it up right now. You can't see me, listeners, but it's beautiful. I love the paper. I love the photos. I love the way that it's organized. Yeah.
Great,
and so
you.
Your co-author is Nick Stevens. So is he like a friend of yours that you met mudlarking and you're like, we should write a book about this?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And because we have a lot of friends, we really wanted to kind of, as I mentioned before, bring the community together. And he's found some absolutely stunning artifacts. And one of the big ones, which I think you might have seen, is a little bit shocking, but he found the complete skeleton of a 12-year-old girl from the mid 18th century. So that's one of Nick's best finds.
What year did he find that?
I think it was 2009, but don't quote me on that.
So he immediately called the police.
He did, yes. And because the tide was actually coming in, the skull was submerged by the time the police actually arrived. And he actually had to put a stake kind of beside the body and then go back and retrieve it underwater. So he literally said it was like pulling a bowling ball out of the mud. He had to put his fingers in the eye sockets and just lift it up slowly.
But he didn't
And the
want to move
police,
it because it was a potential crime scene, right? Or something.
exactly. Yeah. And the police came, but they didn't have the rubber boots on. And because the tide had already come in slightly, Nick had to go wading out and literally just kind of search underwater where he put the stake and then pull the skull out. And then a team of archaeologists went out to excavate the whole skeleton a few weeks later.
And they determined it was a girl, 12 years-ish.
Yes, so it was taken away by the Thames Discovery Program. They're the company or the program that excavated it, and they're trained archaeologists. And they did some radiocarbon dating in order to establish the age, and they fully inspected the whole skeleton. And they said that she was malnourished, and they think that's the cause of death, and that she also had rickets, which is quite a common disease back then because of malnutrition. So they actually analyzed her teeth. And Nick wants to have further tests done so they can establish what she ate, what her diet was, that type of thing. Because these days they can really analyze and find out a lot about what their diet was just from their teeth.
It's sad.
Yeah, very sad. Yeah.
So where is the skeleton today?
I believe it's still with the Thames Discovery Program. They have it in their storage unit.
So what was the strangest thing you've ever found?
Yeah, unfortunately, we do find bodies down there, so that's probably the strangest and more gruesome things that we find, and not old like Nick's, but like from the night before, suicide victims that have been washed up and are face down in the mud. So yeah, it's very heartbreaking, and obviously it's very disturbing. Normally I go down to go mudlarking to get away from the kind of stress of the city, and the last thing you want to do is find someone down there in that condition.
Ugh, I never even thought about that. Ugh. So let's see, where can we find you?
So I post all of my finds on Instagram. So it's at Jason Mudlark, all one word. And I post several times a week and just kind of show you what I'm up to, my favorite finds that I found recently, and also upcoming events. So for instance, this coming September, we've been collaborating with the Totally Thames Festival, the Thames Festival Trust, and we're putting on a whole series of mudlarking exhibitions throughout London, which is quite spectacular because we're actually every weekend going to a different historic venue, and different mudlarks will be displaying their collections there. So we have over 70 mudlarks involved. Wow. And normally our personal collections, because we're allowed to keep pretty much everything we find on the riverbed, a lot of mudlarks have very extensive large collections, which are unfortunately stored under our beds, on top of cupboards, just collecting dust. So we get to dust it all off once a year and kind of take it on a road trip around London. So this year we're starting at Waterman's Hall, which is the home of the Thames watermen and lightermen, which used to live and work along the river. And some of these people still drive the Uber boats or the Thames Clippers, which still go up and down the river. So we start there and exhibit some of our finds in that ancient hall. And then we take everything over to the National Maritime Museum, so over in Greenwich, which is very historic. And we're focusing specifically on Tudor and maritime London because there's so much Tudor history in that area. King Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, Queen Mary, they were all born in that palace that's now been destroyed and built over, but some of the artifacts that we find there on the Greenwich foreshore are actually from that original palace, the Palace of Placentia. So it's such a beautiful area that's steeped in history. So to be able to display some of our Tudor artifacts and some of our maritime artifacts is just absolutely a stunning setting for that. And then we move everything to St. Paul's Cathedral, so in central London. So that was pretty much the heart of where the old city was destroyed back in the Great Fire of 1666. And then the St. Paul's Cathedral was rebuilt in the 17th century by Sir Christopher Wren. So we're actually exhibiting and displaying some of our artifacts in the old medieval part that was untouched by the fire, which is down in the crypt area. So again, such a beautiful historic venue. Then the following week, the last week of September, we're exhibiting over in the Roman amphitheater. And most people don't know this, but London used to have its own amphitheater back in Roman times, built in around the 2nd century AD. And it was discovered back in the 1980s when they were doing some excavation work for the Guildhall Art Gallery. And so they've excavated it, and you can actually walk into the arena where the gladiators used to battle. Wow. And fight wild animals. So to be able to display some of our Roman artifacts in such a historic venue and just bring the history to life. I mean, a lot of times you and I don't have access to these historic artifacts, but the beauty of these exhibitions is that everything is on display and you're allowed to hold the artifacts and just feel the weight of history.
That is cool. I recently interviewed Simon Bourne of Sci Finds, and he is actually in your book, and he talks about the Nathaniel Posner dog tag, which he talked about in my episode, which I thought was really cool. I started reading it. I was like, I know about that. Simon actually told me about that. So you do highlight the finds of other mudlarks. That's the other thing I love about the book and the community, that they're willing to showcase what they found.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't really told too many people yet. I'll make an official announcement some other time, but I'm working on the next book.
Oh, yeah.
And it features over 30 portraits of different mudlarks that are currently active and tells their personal stories and shows some of their best finds.
Oh, I just got the chills. I love it. I can't wait to get it and read it.
So it introduces you to like sci-fi, so Simon Bourne, Nick White, who you said you're also trying to interview. She's in the book. So it's just bringing these people's personal stories to life. And we can't go back in time and meet the people that dropped the artifacts in the Thames, but we can go meet the people that found those artifacts. And it's quite amazing because some of these finds, they've literally changed people's lives. And one of my favorite stories that's at the front of the book, I shouldn't give too much away, is Tobias Netto, who I think you might have heard, found a Victoria Cross medal. And he found that Victoria Cross medal in the Thames that literally changed his life. That was a life-defining moment for him. And it meant so much to him that he's actually had it tattooed on his arm.
Wow.
The image of the Victoria Cross medal. So I just love those pieces of history. Like I said, you can't go back in time, but you can meet the people now and understand how those objects are still on a journey. We're just custodians of these objects that we find. So we're going to give that on to the next generation. I'm going to give my collection to my children, and my son is an active mudlark. And so we just kind of give this on to the next generation. So it's generational.
Yeah, finding the next generation that's interested. So when I came to London the last time, my daughter met us in London. She's 37. And I was like, we're going to go see history together and do all these things. And now she was into the nightlife. And I was like, I don't know what I was expecting. She's not into it, but I'm so thrilled that my great nephew, Finley, who helped me to interview Simon, he's so into this. He loves metal detecting. He loves looking for arrowheads and all those things. So I think he is my next generation. They got to be interested in it, right? So your kids are interested in it. Your son is.
Yeah. So my daughter, she's a little bit older now. She's 14, so she's less interested. She used to love going and hunting for garnets. I think you've probably heard about the garnets that we find in the Thames. So she's had beautiful pieces of jewelry made with the garnets that she's found. She had a beautiful ring made and also a lovely pendant that was actually made by a jewelry designer in Texas. He saw one of my posts on Instagram and asked me to send him some garnets, and then made me a lovely pendant using my daughter's garnets. So my daughter used to love going garnet hunting or searching for them. My son, he loves the history, especially around the Tudor time. One of his favorite finds is a coin from King Henry VIII.
Wow.
So to find something that you've just learned about in history the day before in class and to hold something that's 500 years old is just mind-boggling. And when we got home, originally we couldn't tell what kind of coin it was because it was fully corroded and not corroded, but encrusted.
Yeah.
So I had to release that incrustation using electrolysis at home. And then it came up as shiny as new, and we could make out the bust of King Henry VIII. But then when I looked in the book, Spink's book, to find out like what exact coin it was, it said it wasn't actually from King Henry VIII. It's actually from his son. So his son became king shortly after Henry VIII's death, but he was so young, he didn't last that long. So he became king when he was age 9. And because he was such a young king, nobody trusted the money with his face on it. So in order to get away around that and just kind of get some respect, he used his father's face on the coin, even though it was his coinage. So it says Edward on it, but it's actually got his father's face on it.
Oh, that's interesting.
And my son was 9 years old when he actually found the coin. And the boy who became king, that was made in his first year when he was 9 years old. So a 9-year-old king, his coin was found by my 9-year-old son. So that was one of the best
full
stories.
circle. It comes full circle.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's that connection to those items and the tangibility of it. And like with the clay pipes, I found a couple clay pipes. It's like somebody threw it in the Thames for me to find. And that's like a tangible connection in a way that, even though they're not here today, it's still connecting and even if you don't know who it was, it still, fosters the imagination. And I don't know, I really like that. I think that connection to history, everything that happened before to bring us here today, all the narrow misses of our ancestors, like all those things. It just, if you're not in awe of that, I can't relate to you.
Yeah. True.
No, that's extreme. That's not true, but.
Yeah, in terms of my own personal stories, so my ancestors sailed over from England back in 1638, so 18 years after the Mayflower sailed. And they started their journey from Southwold, which is up in Norfolk, so on the east coast of England, and sailed first to Connecticut, where you said you used to live. So they were in the New Haven colony for 1 year, didn't like it in New Haven, and decided to move right across the bay over to Long Island. And that's where, with 12 other families, so 13 in total, they started their own colony, which is called the Southold Colony, which is named after the place that they started in England back in 1638. So in 1640 is when they started that colony. And so my ancestors were original colonists, and we don't have any heirlooms from that time period. So when I find something from like the 1630s or early 1640s, I just know that they would have had those types of coins in their pockets, or they would have been smoking those same clay pipes. So just kind of, it gives me the goosebumps as well, just knowing that my ancestors used to have that in their pockets.
Yeah, that's interesting. So my people came over from England. I found out after my father passed because he was pure Irish in his mind, but it turned out that his grandfather was pure English. And that's really when I became fascinated with England, because I was doing that genealogical research. And so there was a part of my family, not direct ancestors, that broke off, and they went over to the same area, Connecticut, New Haven. The last name was Budd. And I've connected our trees. But then my people came over actually to Canada from Hampshire. They were basically in Hampshire, and there was a thing called the Petworth Scheme. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but basically it was for all the agricultural workers that were rebellious and out of work because technology was changing. So those were my people. And what happened is they basically supported people to go over to Canada. They gave them some land, and they cleared away the land, and they were able to start off new there. And so most of my family came over in the 1800s to Canada and then moved down into the United States. But when and I say all this because when I went there in 2013 and lived in London, I did a lot of traveling to the areas that I had traced my family to. And, maybe it's just my imagination, but I really connected to some of the areas in Hampshire, like me and Stoke was a little town. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, close to Winchester. But there was just this feeling of connection that I have never had anywhere else. And I really and that really kind of fostered my love of the UK. And there's so many more areas I'd love to go to there. But the countryside, everything about it just really spoke to me. And yeah, so that kind of has fed my desire to find artifacts in the Thames like you and imagine, oh, this is what my ancestors were up to. This is what they were doing. This is what they were wearing and that type of thing. So, but I do
Yeah.
digress.
No, that's what I think. It just makes it so relevant to us. And I'm the first generation to actually move back to the UK.
Uh-huh.
So after almost 400 years, I'm the first one to move back now from my family side, from my mother's side. So that was quite exciting. For over 200 years, they never left the island. They obviously traveled, but the people didn't move off the island. And it was my grandfather's generation that was one of the first ones. Obviously, people before that moved off, but he moved to upstate New York, which isn't too far from Long Island. And then my mom's generation, they moved to California, to Chicago, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. So they kind of scattered a bit further afield. Then my generation, my brother moved to France, and I've moved to England. So we've really kind of immigrated back to Europe.
That's great.
In just 3 generations. So
How was the move? Like, was there culture shock, or did you just easily kind of step into living in England?
so I originally was living in Germany before I moved to England, and that was much more of a culture shock, obviously, just because of the language. In Britain, it felt like I was coming home after having lived in Germany for 8 years. Britain felt like, oh, this is very much like America, similar language. I'm still learning the correct words at different times, like pants here, it means your underwear, whereas
I guess I didn't know that.
they say trousers. So I used to say, yeah, oh, I got my pants dirty, which means I soiled my underwear, which I was always a little bit embarrassed when I found out that, oops, I should say trousers and not pants. So
Well, it takes a lot of courage to do that, to kind of root yourself and go to another country. My fantasy would be to live in London for 3 months out of the year and travel out from there, but I haven't figured that one out yet. So, where do we see this history in pop culture?
yeah, in terms of pop culture, though, I think that because of social media, really people like yourselves, people abroad are really hearing about this a unique phenomenon that's happening in London. So mudlarking doesn't occur in many cities just because you don't have the right conditions. So London is unusual because the tide fluctuates about 7 to 10 meters twice a day, which is the height of a 2-story building. So if you go to Paris, the Seine, the River Seine, doesn't go up and down at all unless there's like a drought. In Berlin, the River Spree doesn't go up and down at all. It's not a tidal river. So all of those treasures that have been lost along the river in both Paris and Berlin are not able to be found. I used to live in New York City along the Hudson River, and that also just fluctuates not that much in terms of the height of the water. It doesn't really reveal the riverbed at low tide. it still is relatively constant. It does go up and down and fluctuate, but it doesn't really expose a lot of the riverbed. So mudlarking, as far as I'm aware, is not such a big phenomenon in New York City because you don't have the conditions for finding artifacts on the exposed riverbed of the East River or of the Hudson. Whereas in London, because the riverbed at low tide becomes the longest and largest archaeological site, that's why we're able to go searching and hunting. And in terms of pop culture, it's really only because of social media that people abroad have found out about mudlarking. It's become much more popular. And like yourself, you say you're coming to London specifically to go mudlarking. That is just a recent phenomenon that's only started in the last 10, 15 years.
I wonder if they're going to have to start even regulating that.
Yeah, it has grown exponentially. I got all the statistics from the Port of London Authority just this year, and the number of permits has gone up over double within the last 4 years. So I think just because of social media, a lot of people these days are known kind of internationally. The mudlarks are similar to myself, and that's why there's kind of a general interest from around the world. And it's very rare, as I was mentioning earlier, that you can find historical artifacts and be able to keep them. It really is a British phenomenon. If you were living in Turkey and you found an ancient artifact, you could be arrested if you would take that home and not report it. So we're very lucky here in Britain to be able to, after we report things, to be able to keep them. So like I mentioned, many mudlarks have thousands of artifacts within their collections. So that's why I think it's become a pop phenomenon at the moment. It's just because a lot of people worldwide would love to have that opportunity in their own backyard, similar to what we have here in London.
Yeah, that's true. So I'm always trying to figure out places to go metal detecting. And I live in a National Historic Landmark District in Colorado. And so I do I guess it's mudlarking because I find all kinds of stuff in the mud around here that are from the mining period, the 1800s. Yeah, so I'm always looking for a place to go and find treasure and history and that type of thing, but there aren't as many options, like you say, as what the Thames affords. Mm-hmm. So, what's the most valuable thing you've ever found?
So I actually don't really know because I never have anything valued. Sometimes I do check online if I know it's something that's either very rare or potentially historically important. But I've never had anything properly valued, so I'm not sure exactly what the value of individual items are. But one of the most unusual coins that I've ever found, which I know is worth a few thousand, is a coin that was made in the 17th century. It's made out of pewter. And it was only in circulation for 2 weeks. And because it was only in circulation for such a short period of time, it's worth a lot of money because they didn't produce that many of them. And most of them were melted down and made into other coins or other objects because the metal was quite precious back then. Pewter was not something that, every man had.
So what made you write the book?
So the reason why I wrote the book is just to really tell the whole story of London through the artifacts that we found in the river. So other books have been written before, but it's about people's personal collections. And this book was the first time that someone has written about the wider community's collection. So not focused on my own personal finds or Nick's personal finds. It was kind of like a group effort to bring the book together. So that was the main reason, is a lot of the fantastic artifacts that have been found aren't really known to the general public. We know them as mudlarks because we've studied and done a lot of research, but it hadn't been pulled together as kind of as a one source. The Museum of London has done a fantastic job with researching a lot of the different artifacts or collections. So for instance, they acquired a collection of pewter toys from medieval times to post-medieval times. Those were all donated or acquired from a mudlark called Tony Pilson, who's unfortunately passed away. But they came out with a great volume, a catalog, just with all of the different types of toys that have been found in the Thames. So they do things like pilgrim badges they focus on, computer toys, as I just mentioned, and other like dress accessories, but it doesn't cover everything. So from the Roman times all the way to modern day times. So that's what we're trying to establish in the book, is just to kind of bring everything together and also keep it concise and short and inexpensive. So everyone can buy it. It's not going to break your bank to buy this book. It's less than £10.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to share with my audience?
Yeah, the one thing that I would love to share is we're not only doing the exhibitions every September, but our end game is to open our own museum. A lot of the artifacts that are on display in museums today, again, they kind of show the silver, the gold, the very precious things that people owned. And it wasn't just normal people, it was always like the wealthy aristocrats, the royals, the monarchs, the richest people of society. But it's very uncommon to see just the ordinary objects like a button, a humble button, and how that can tell the story about one person who lived in London 200 years ago. So what we want to do is bring all the ordinary objects in, like the bone toothbrushes that were used in Victorian times, or the Tudor combs that were used to comb out the nits. So everyday personal objects, not the kind of gold and silver rings. I'm sure we'll have some of those as well. But we just want to tell the story of ordinary people throughout the 2,000 years of history along the River Thames. So the story of London, again, through the artifacts that we found. And the book was just the start of that. So the book is kind of a printed form of what we'd love to do in the museum itself.
Is there like something in the works for the museum, or is it just like a vision right now?
So I'm an architect myself, and I've been working on the project for several years. We've been to the Houses of Parliament. We've been to the Mayor's office. We've been to many different people around London, meeting them, talking about the project. And we've also been meeting with exhibition designers, getting their proposals and ideas. And we've been also working with developers and trying to find a suitable location along the Thames. It should be along the river, and that's why it's taken a bit longer than we had hoped, just because obviously that's prime real estate. So we've got a very good lead at the moment, and we're just waiting for the planning permission to be granted. And then hopefully we're able to make an announcement at some point. But the other part of the museum, which is one of the more unusual things, is we really want to make the museum experience kind of evolve around school kids, anyone that's interested actually going on a guided tour of the foreshore themselves. So normally when you go to a museum, everything's behind a glass counter, a glass box, or a glass wall. We want to remove the glass and allow people to find things for themselves. And as you know from your own experience going down on the river, you always find something interesting. Like my son, when he first started going, and I see many kids do this, they found a cow's tooth, and they're huge. But just that in itself, it has no kind of worth as such, but it just kind of piques your interest and gets you interested about London's history and where did that tooth come from, and who had that cow for dinner, or was that used to make a leather shoe or another byproduct. So all of these small things, whether it's a rock, a stone, a clay pipe bowl, or a pipe stem, or a broken bit of pottery, all of that just unlocks a new story about London's past. And that's what we want to bring to the museum, is allow you to discover history for yourself, not just have it kind of fed to you through the displays within the museum.
Yeah, I think that makes a huge difference. When I was in York, we went to the Yorkshire Museum.
Yeah.
And they had areas where you could actually touch some of the artifacts, the old coins and that type of thing. And then the Viking museum Center they have there, which is funky. Yeah, and the museum part, like you could touch different things, and it makes a huge difference. You're right. So how is that going to be funded, just out of curiosity?
So we're looking for grants from the Heritage Lottery Fund. And there's a lot of different other sources that we've been looking into, and we've been speaking with various charities. We're ourselves a registered charity now in the UK. So we are actively looking for sponsors. But again, these projects, they don't happen overnight unless you have a huge grant from a private individual It takes many years. And obviously with COVID, just having passed through the pandemic, a lot of the funding has dried up just because a lot of sources are propping up current museums because they haven't had an income over the past 2 years. So a lot of that's just been kind of diverted over to not new projects, but to existing projects just to make sure that they don't, go under.
That's interesting. So what's the name of your organization?
It's called Thames Museum. That's the name of the museum. And you can find us at thamesmuseum.org. So if you go online, it's www.thamesmuseum, that's one word, .org.
Okay, and I'll definitely link out to that, to your social media, do you have a website?
I don't personally, but I post
Instagram.
a lot of things on yeah.
Okay. And I definitely recommend the book, whether you're a mudlark or not, because the history is fascinating. The stories that are told through the artifacts is amazing. So definitely, what's the name of the book again, one more time?
Thames Mudlarking, Searching for London's Lost Treasures.
Okay, and was there anything else?
I think we've pretty much covered everything.
Yeah, I think so too.
Just one thing is kind of unrelated, but you mentioned Simon. We were commissioned by the historic royal palaces to go searching in the moat around the Tower of London castle this year. The Society of Thames Mudlarks has established a really good working relationship with the Museum of London over the years, and they have used mudlarks on different sites along the river for decades now. Because we're skilled metal detectorists, they use us to comb sites that are currently being excavated. So if new developments are being built along the river and they're digging down, they want to make sure that they find everything. And archaeologists, they do a fantastic job looking and finding things by sight. But as a metal detectorist, we find everything that's metallic on the site that sometimes can be overlooked because it is a very black mud that we're searching through. So late last year, we were invited by the historic royal palaces to metal detect within the moat of the Tower of London Castle, which is right along the river in central London. It's one of the most historic sites in London and is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So it's absolutely, I was just blown away by the opportunity to go down and look for lost artifacts in the moat. So the first day, it was just two mudlarks and the Museum of London. We were the only ones, so three of us that were actually searching for these lost artifacts in the moat. So Nick Stevens, the co-author of the book, and myself, and then Stuart White from the Museum of London. So to be honest, I thought we'd just find a lot of pull tabs from bottles or bottle caps, a lot of modern rubbish or garbage, trash in the moat. But within the first hour, we started finding medieval artifacts. And somehow, obviously, over the years, there's stratification. But because there's been different building works within the moat over the past 200 years, things have come to the surface as they were digging through different layers. So we were just metal detecting the spoil that they were excavating because they were putting in a new drainage system within the moat to irrigate a new project, which is called the Super Bloom Project, which was a kind of commemorative flower garden for Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee, which happened in June. So that's why they asked us to volunteer. So I volunteered over 3 different days, took 3 days off of work to go down and search for pretty much 8 to 10 hours and just find anything that we could salvage from the old moat. What an absolutely cracking opportunity to actually discover London's history in a site that's not on the river. It was actually a field. It's a grassy kind of field now within the moat. But we did find Tudor artifacts. We found medieval artifacts, a lot of Victorian things. And one of the key things that the Museum of London, also Historic Royal Palace, has said is that we have found a large cross-section of the Tower of London's history, but the one thing that they didn't know is how many different people use the moat for their training grounds. So soldiers used to come and train at the Tower of London, and they would even camp within the moat itself. And they have no record of all of the different people and different soldiers and different regiments that have been in the moat. But as we were finding their buttons, the buttons that they left behind have their insignia and their names. So, for instance, Lovat Scouts, they were in the moat. And previously it was unknown that they were in the moat practicing or training. So we found a lot of bullets and ammunition along with their badges, their cap badges, their buttons off their uniforms. And so that was quite fascinating just to find long lost history. And it now serves as a good record of who actually was using the moat from pretty much Victorian times up until present day, after the moat was infilled back in, I think it was around 1835 when the water was drained.
That was going to be my next question. When did they take the water out of it? That's cool. That sounds really exciting. Anything else?
I think we literally have covered everything now.
Yeah, I think so. Jason, Sandy, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thanks so much for having me.
There you have it. Jason Sandy. The name of the book is Thames Mudlarking, Searching for London's Lost Treasures. To find out more about the book and about Jason, do check out our episode notes. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.